That was an example from this book, Complete Book of Jazz Guitar Lines and Phrases by Sid Jacobs. In this video, I want to share with you what's in this book, the kind of the gist of it, so you get an idea of what you could expect to learn if you get this book and what I learned. And this book actually brings me back to when I've started learning jazz improvisation. I wasn't using that book wasn't around back then, but I was using that stuff. So I'll explain what I mean by that. There's a lot to be said about Sid Jacobs in this book, but I want to get started, so let's get started, shall we? I want to look at this chapter first. I'm not going to look at all the chapters, but this one is called idioms. So idiomatic 2 or 2-5 shapes. So meaning something that you could play over, for example, a D minor 7 or a D minor to G7, so a 2-5. Or it could be a static G7 or G sus. So it could be the tune So What? Where there's a static D minor chord, or it could be Maiden Voyage where there's a static sus chord. So that would be D mixo. But we're not thinking too much about scales here. We're just thinking about little idiomatic phrases. You can call them licks. So it could sound like this. Right? That's an extremely common jazz phrase. Could be triplets. Or this one. So if I play a little loop here with D minor 7 to G7. It could sound like this. Right? Or I'm just playing through this. So there's a whole bunch of these, and it comes with audio so you can hear them.
Number 3. Number 4.
So he goes through them a little bit quickly there. I personally would have preferred if he kind of repeated them and gave us a count-in so you could play along. But anyway, there's audio with this book that you can download so you can hear all the examples performed by Sid Jacobs himself. So why was this familiar to me? Well, because this is the same material that they gave you at GIT. When I went to GIT, jazz guitar was an elective, so it wasn't part of the curriculum. It was something that was an elective, and Sid Jacobs had put together the material for that course, which is the same stuff that I guess ended up in this book. So I've seen most of this stuff before, and this is the kind of stuff I used. I remember using this a lot when I try to learn to play jazz. So there's a whole bunch of these, right? Like there's so many little idiomatic phrases like that. I'm just giving you a few. As always, I'm not here to give you the content of the book. I'm giving you an idea of what the content is about. So how could you work with these? There are many ways you could work with these. You could play them over a vamp like I just did, like a loop, but you want to make sure you do it in every key. You can also use different fingerings. So there are tabs here, but he also has a chapter on using different fingerings for the same phrase, right? If I take the first one, for example, or if I take this one. Obviously, this is the guitarist's dilemma, right? Like there's so many fingerings, but you don't want to get obsessed with every possible fingering for every lick, because then you'll never get through the book. But a few different fingerings for each lick I think is good, and also to play them through every key. You could also use them over tunes that have short 2/5s in them, such as Satin Doll. So let's try this over Satin Doll. I'm gonna take this one. And I'm gonna play that through the changes of this tune. of course, you could play over like a so what or a more modal tune. So here, I'm just kind of playing the phrase as it is. I'm not really doing anything with it. So here's a little thing that I want to talk about, an issue that comes up with books like this. And it's not a criticism of the book at all. It's just that what happens sometimes is that we get a book like this, where there's a whole bunch of licks or phrases that you can use, and you get excited. So I'm going to play through all of them. So you play through number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on. And then maybe you get tired of the book and you put it away or put it on a shelf, or you actually play through the whole book. And you still feel like I didn't learn anything. I mean, obviously, if you do that, you're going to get better at some point, but it can feel like nothing of this comes out when I'm playing. Because what you want is this jazz language to transfer from the page into your musical vocabulary so that these ideas come out in a musical and creative way when you're playing. So I did that. I played through every example and I got like really obsessed with it. And I felt like, nothing is happening. Well, first off, you're gonna be patient, right? Like if I practice this now, it's gonna show up in my playing maybe a year from now. So that's the first thing. But I think there's a better way to practice this stuff. Instead of playing through all of these licks, take the ones that you like. That's why it's good to have a book like this. You can mark down, like, I like this one. And if there's a lick you don't like, just scratch it out. And then try to play that lick that you like for whatever reason. Instead of playing all these licks over one tune, play one lick over 100 tunes. So try to find as many tunes as possible that you already know. Make a playlist in iReal Pro and play the same lick over all those tunes. That's a much better way to practice, I think. It's gonna take longer to get through the book, but it's gonna be more useful. So next thing to do is to try to manipulate the lick, tweak it, and be able to do something with it. So I was actually studying at GIT when Sid Jacobs was teaching there. I don't think I had private instruction with him. I don't think he was teaching privately, but he was definitely teaching some classes there. I remember that. He was one of the most popular and one of the better teachers there, I think. And at the same time, I was studying with Scott Henderson, and he had a different take on this stuff. He wanted you to learn these licks, short licks, but he wanted you to play them, like do something with them. So I go back to the vamp. Here's lick. Maybe try to play it in different places rhythmically. He would go like, do something that feels like you're saying something, or play into the lick. Play out a lick. That was the octave displacement. Or you can keep the contour, but play maybe larger intervals. Or closer. Play it somewhere else. Maybe there's another way you can play that same. Well, I had to change it a little bit. Move it around. So what's happening here is that I'm being creative with this stuff. So I'm actually improvising using the language. Some of you might have seen one of my recent videos where I talk about Wayne Kranz's book, An Improviser's OS. In this book, the idea is to get away from this stuff, the standard language. This book is all about learning the standard language. So they're kind of opposite like that. I don't have a problem with that. I find both approaches useful. And I think this approach should come first. You learn the language, But the idea is that you can be creative and innovative with these standard licks and phrases. And then once you've done that and you learn how to solo using jazz standard language, standard jazz vocabulary over a tune, then you might feel like, oh, I'm just playing like everybody else. Like I'm not adding anything interesting. That's when a book like this comes in, I think. So this is more of an advanced book in that sense. Some people had an issue with, they thought I was kind of diminishing Wayne Kranz's method and making fun of it. No, not at all. I wouldn't cover a book that I didn't find useful. I was just disagreeing with some of the ideas that he has about, it's not about avoiding jazz standard phrases. It's about, in my opinion, using them in a creative way. You can be creative with these. Then you might feel like some of these phrases, for example, like this one. The Crimea River lick, which I have made a video about, because it can be very useful to practice that. It's overused, you might feel. It's, so you might want to avoid licks that are too cliche, but that's your job as an artist to decide where that line is. Another thing is you can do is that you can combine these licks. Once you know how to play them, you can combine them. Let's see if I can do that. I'm just going to combine them randomly. And at some point, your instinct takes over and you can just kind of start to play longer lines, combining these shorter. And obviously, it's not just enough with playing through a book. You should listen to jazz and where these lines are coming from. So listening to the masters, Charlie Parker and all that stuff is very important in combination with the book like this. So if you're transcribing Charlie Parker, let's say, you will notice that, oh, here's that lick. Like Grant Green will play this all the time. But if I never listen to Grant Green, I don't have a point of reference. I'm just learning from a book. So it's important to have a reference as well. All right, moving on. Then he talks about the 2 chord. Let's say you have a 2-5 to C. On that G chord, you could use, like more altered extensions. So you could play, or so if I have a 2-5, D minor, G7 to C major 7. That was a phrase from this page, or maybe a longer one. Again, we have, 3 pages of licks like these. So then the idea is you take some licks from the first idiomatic situation, the 2, and then you combine it with the dominant idiomatic phrase. So if I take this one for my D minor chord, and then I pick something from here. Let's see how that works. Let's see if I can add something to make it more. And then, you guessed it, the next chapter is where you're playing over the major chord. So over C major, you could play. Or maybe. That's a nice one. Maybe. Sounds a little bit too much like. So here's the next thing you can do. You can decide, I'm gonna improvise freely over the 2-5 and then play the idiomatic phrase over the major chord or vice versa. So, and then I'll play. And then I'm gonna play the next one. Or maybe you have a situation where there are major chords, major 7th chords moving around. E flat, A flat to D flat major 7. You could use these licks. Remember Scott Henderson's adding something. Starting on different beats. Maybe triplets. Change the intervals. So the idea here is that I'm creative. I'm taking something that is a standard phrase and then I'm adding my own creativity and my skills, I guess, to it. So that was the first chapter. There are many books by Sid Jacobs. There are a few other books by Sid Jacobs. I have covered 2 of them that I'm aware of. He might have some more books out there. So this one, Modern Jazz Concepts for Guitar, talks a lot about triad pairs in a very interesting way, and I have a lesson on that. I will link to it. This is published by Musicians Institute publishers, and it's always really high quality books, very nice looking books. And of course there's this one. So Sid Jacobs, I guess, is most famous for being a Bill Evans expert. He can play like Bill Evans on the guitar. And he has this book called the Bill Evans Guitar Book, which I have covered years ago. I had to go search for it and I couldn't find it, but finally found it, and I realized there's a whole bunch of tunes here, arrangements of Bill Evans tunes that I haven't played, so you'll probably see me play a few of these in the future. Then he also plays a lot of phrases that work over the typical jazz chord progressions that you find in jazz. Of course, 2-5-1s, but also, let's see, where is it here? Miscellaneous phrases over common progressions. So like that kind of stuff, right? Stuff that kind of reminds me of Joe Pass type playing, the stuff you find in Joe Pass book. Then there's that blues, that I played in the beginning. Bird blues. Same thing here, you can add your own ideas. Once you get comfortable, you can start changing things around, and you notice I changed the rhythm a little bit. Something that a book like this don't teach you is how to swing. So you have to, that's why it's important to play along with recordings and learn how to swing. But you can edit notes, you can leave something out. You can also, when you play anything kind of blues related, you can always go into the blues scale. So there are a lot of things you can do with these exercises. Then he gets into chapters of quartal harmony and fourths, and then he talks about the symmetrical scales, the diminished scales, and the melodic minor scales, and so on. So this is my only issue with this book, and the issue I had with the material they were giving me at GIT. I was like 19 years old. I could play it through jazz tunes before I went there, but I could play like a solo over footprints or whatever, but I didn't know how to play bebop. And I was learning that over that year at GIT, and I remember this first dive stuff that I covered, the idiomatic phrases, was very helpful. But then when you got into this more advanced stuff, the quartal harmony and the symmetrical harmony, I wasn't ready for that. But they just give you all this material. I think there's a little bit of too much of a leap from learning to play over Satin doll until getting into the kind of quartal harmony of John Coltrane, right? So you need to, ideally you would learn to play over bebop tunes and standards first. Then you move on to the more, advanced stuff. Because this gets all of a sudden kind of advanced. It talks about pentatonics and quartal harmony and fourths. A lick could sound like this. So those are like quartal structures. Something like chicory I would play. Here's a chord fourth lick, which is just an arpeggio. And of course you could use this kind of material over a lot of different types of chords. Some pentatonic fourth shapes. Let's take a listen.
Some pentatonic fourth shapes. The first one. The next one.
Uh-huh.
The next one.
Yeah, I don't want to give you too much of this. So if you like it, you should get the book right. So It has tabs and notation. So these kind of licks would work over like a C major chord, or maybe like a A minor to, or it could be a D sus, so that could be maiden voyage actually. You know, maiden voyage has this static D sus chord. The problem is it's hard to play these fast. So a lot of this stuff comes from Joe Diorio, who was also teaching at GIT at that time I was there, but he was too intimidating and it went over my head. I wasn't ready for that stuff. And I'm pretty sure Joe Diorio or Sid Jacobs studied with Joe Diorio, or he was his mentor, I guess. Sid Jacobs also studied with Jimmy Weibel, who I've made a lot of videos playing his etudes. A very interesting guitarist who's behind the scenes there in LA. A lot of famous guitarists studied with Jimmy Weibel. So then he talks about how you can take these pentatonic concepts and go outside and play outside of the tonality, kind of like this tune, right? So, what's it called? Freedom Jazz Dance, Eddie Harris. I don't remember it, but that's an example of this kind of very angular way of playing where you play fourths and fifths and go in and outside of a tonality, because it kind of lends itself to go outside if you play this way. And he talks about this. So that's, again, it's a little bit, all of a sudden it gets kind of advanced. So for example, this is very good, the one chapter. He talks about, you take a couple of fourths, those A, D, G, C. So how many ways can you play those notes? Well, it's 24 different ways. So A, D, G, C. You could play A, D, C, G, or A, C, D, C, A, G, D, C. Not to be confused with AC/DC. You get the idea, and then you could play them in many different. If I play them ascending, A, G, D, C. A, C, D, G. No. A, C, G, D. Oh, that's what I always play. And then you start with the next note, D, and then all the combinations you can find there. Then it's the direction of the contour of the phrase, so you could go up, up, up. So let's say I play the first one, up, 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 it sounds like this. A, D, G, C. It's like stack of fourths, like it's like that TV show Recess. Do, 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 da. But I can go up, down, down. Then I get, because the fourth reversed is fifths, right? So do, 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 da. I could go up, down, up, up, down, up. Do, 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 da. So I'm playing the same notes, just in exhausting every combination. So that's obviously a lot of work, and these notes could be many different chords. Could be an F major, could be a D sus, could be a B flat major, it could be B altered. So you realize all the endless possibilities here.
Push it some way. Everybody's trying to find out how to play it their own way, I think, you know. It changed from the tradition of bebop. It got more esoteric, so to speak, and people were pushing the tonality. Like, say, for instance, for those who know what I'm talking about, if the tonality is here, they were pushing it this way, and they were pushing it that way, and they're pushing it further out and pushing it further out. Now, some of it sounds lousy. Some of it sounds absolutely noisy in my estimation, but then on the other hand, in the hands of the right players, it sounds beautiful. I'm not saying that I'm a great bebop player, but I was lucky enough to know something about it so that I could use those licks, combine my outside licks and my inside licks, so that they sounded hopefully melodic. So you see that's inside, it's, you know, it's right here. Now here I'm going to take it out. Still A minor, but I staggered it. You got this, you got this, you got this. But that's the way I think people were playing at the time. They were getting a feeling to take more chances and stretch the tonality. We were, I know we were leaving the diatonic system of music and playing the 12-tone system of music where all the notes work, you know. And I think it's a very valid way to play music these days too, but you know, people are always afraid to go into the unknown, so.
Then he gets into the symmetrical scales and the more kind of Slonimsky things where you take an interval and you play it in different like a fourth moving in tritones. Like the stuff you find in the Slonimsky book, which I have, but I can't find it right now. But I've made videos about Slonimsky's book stuff as well. So there's a lot of stuff in here. Octave displacement, whole tone fingerings, and diminished, a lot of diminished patterns and stuff, diminished scales, a lot of whole chapter on that. So I remember I got it when I was trying to learn this stuff, that you could use these fourths, that you could use those fourths in your playing, but I couldn't find a way to kind of combine this with, those were like two separate worlds. One was sounding like Joe Diorio, and the other was sounding like Grant Green. I couldn't find a way to combine them. And so what you need to do is you need to listen to where this stuff is coming from. So listening to Joe Diorio, and where is he getting it from? It's like Eddie Harris, somebody who could play, you know, like these pentatonic shapes over a standard, combining it with like more traditional bebop language, is Woody Shaw. So how many of you have listened to Woody Shaw? So you listen to him a lot, transcribe his solos. That's how you should learn his stuff. Then it will make sense, because they have already figured out how to do this. So that's something that I often say to my students when they want to learn how to play jazz. And the teacher's answer is always, yeah, you need to listen to it. But if you think about it, when we play electric guitar, most of us, if not all of us, come from like a rock and blues background. That's how our first introduction to this instrument. That's why we want to play it. We heard Jimi Hendrix or whatever. And we didn't hear necessarily Alan Holdsworth. We heard a blues rock player. And it's a little bit different, I find, with the newer generation. My students that come up, they are not necessarily from like a rock always background. They listen to R&B and all this stuff. But anyway, my point is that the first solos I tried to play on this instrument wasn't bebop or hard bop or modal jazz or anything. It was like, you know, people listen to Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page or somebody like that, and you spend hours learning those solos. For me, it was David Gilmour, and it was Ritchie Blackmore. Those were like the first solos, the first players I transcribed, or I try to lift their solos, and I learned how to play like them, right? So when you pick up a guitar, you can do all these things without thinking, right? That you actually don't think about. It's kind of some stuff like that I got from Richard Blackmore or whatever. These little inflections, you don't even think about them. You just can do it without thinking because you've spent hours figuring out how to do that. But if you want to play like this stuff, you have to do the same thing with John Coltrane and Woody Shaw and but most of us haven't done that. So my point is that the reason this is difficult is because we haven't spent enough time with it. And it's a good idea to remember how difficult it was to learn the pentatonic shape, the blues scale, when you were starting out. And then after, listening closely and, playing the same phrase over and over and over, you probably got some of that language down. And now you need to do the same thing with this. So that's why it's not enough to just play through the book, but the book is good because it can kind of give you the information and explain it in a good way, which Sid Jacobs does. But you don't forget that you need to transcribe a lot of solos and play along with the recordings where this stuff is being used. Sorry about that rant. Anyway, this is a really good book. I recommend it. And if you want to continue on this Sid Jacobs thread, you can watch my videos on this book and my videos on the Bill Evans guitar book. And with all that, I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.